Hello, I'm Jamie Heller. I'm the editor-in-chief of Business Insider. Thank you so much for being here. We're talking about the global jobs gap. As the World Economic Forum has reported, there's over 400 million, a jobs gap of over 400 million, and that's obviously seriously concerning to everyone in that number and the economic prosperity and stability of our world. So I'm very happy to be here with you and our panelists. We are honored to have to start the President of Singapore, President Tharman, and a member of the Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity. What's the scale of the challenge? Because we do have a looming global crisis of jobs. 1.2 billion people in the developing world, developing and emerging world, are going to be entering the workforce in the next 10 years, 1.2 billion. It's without precedent. And on all reasonable projections, we'll be producing something like 400 million jobs. So that leaves 800 million people who'll probably find some way of filtering into the informal economy, some form of underemployment, or they'll be plain unemployed. And we know the consequences of that. They're not just about wages, they're not just about economics. They're fundamentally social, political, and they will shape a new international disorder. It's also not just a crisis of jobs we face, but a crisis of social compact. It's a crisis of hope, of self-belief and dignity, and a crisis of solidarity. So we really have to recognize that this challenge is a challenge that it's not just about manpower ministers and employment ministers and employers and unions. It's a much broader societal-wide challenge, and it's actually an international challenge. And when we think of it that way, we have to think of addressing the jobs challenge through life and comprehensively. The fact is, if you look across countries, if you look at across regions within countries, and if you compare different states within countries, the fact is, what you do to develop human potential through life shapes how well people do in jobs, whether they retain jobs, whether they're able to adjust to the churn in the job market, whether they end up feeling they've had a satisfactory career. Shaping human potential through life. Don't wait for kids to leave school, kids to leave university and come into the workforce. That's actually the narrow definition of the jobs challenge. Start early. We know all about the science, about the criticality of the first year of life and the first 3 years of life. I won't elaborate about it, but that's critical to addressing the jobs challenge. Developing human potential early in life. What happens in school is critical. If you look at the countries which end up in the top 5 to 10 places in the global PISA rankings, imperfect, but they're fairly good measures of how well school systems are doing. Almost all of them are dominated by public school systems. The countries where the private schools are at the top, and then you've got some public schools occupying, schooling the majority of kids, are not the countries at the top. The countries at the top are the countries where they've got public school systems, either universally or in the main, and with public schools at the top as well. They're not driven by excellence is not driven by private schools. And there's a very important lesson there, because it shows that it is possible to provide high quality education on a broad base and to prepare whole workforces, whole cohorts of students for a life of doing well at work and gaining a sense of fulfillment from work. But school education is critical. It doesn't stop at school. In other words, you don't just address this upstream and think that it takes care of the downstream. It requires continuous investment through life in human potential. And one of the big challenges we face all over the world, in the advanced countries, the US, Europe, Britain, in the developing world that's now doing quite well, like China, and in most of the low-income countries, is now a huge mismatch of skills, and a mismatch of aspirations people who've gone through education, invested some family resources, or had state resources invested in a tertiary education, and they come onto the market and they can't find jobs that match their skills and their aspirations. That mismatch of skills and aspirations is a major challenge. And if we don't solve it, again, we get more than an economic problem. We get a problem of a whole generation feeling the system has failed them. They put all their effort into a particular cause of education, they can't get the jobs they want, and the system has failed them. So we have to take the mismatch of skills very seriously. And it requires a few basic adjustments, and I'll just stick to two. First, it requires changing what we do before they end up in the workforce. What happens in tertiary education? What happens in post-16 education? Internationally, almost without variation, I mean, there are a few examples like Singapore and a couple of small Northern European countries which are different. But in most countries, including China, India, and most of the West, tertiary education systems have been expanded, but over-academized. They're overly academically oriented. They have neglected technical skills. So we didn't just expand college enrollment, we didn't just expand enrollment beyond the age of 16 in education, we also had it tilted very heavily to one particular model of education that previously applied to a very narrow cohort of students when university education was rare, which is a highly academic model of education. And it's created a hierarchy as well, a hierarchy where academic skills are ranked above technical skills or the skills you acquire through experience. And that's at the heart of the mismatch between what people are trained for and what the job market and employers want. And it can be corrected. It can be corrected. We've got to find ways in which the technical and applied route for learning is also a route to achieve the highest levels of excellence and expertise. The highest levels of excellence and expertise. And that's the reorientation we need in education systems, so that people come out with the benefit of skills that they know are relevant. And let's demolish another shibboleth. There's too easy an argument, often by renowned academics or those who sort of are the heads of Ivy League universities or liberal arts colleges, about how, well, look, the traditional education is good because it gives you more breadth, it gives you the soft skills you take through life. Soft skills and breadth are not the sole province of the traditional university education. They can also be developed through the technical route, through the applied route, through dual education, because there's so many soft skills. The soft skills are learning how to develop strengths in a team, to meld different strengths in a team. The soft skills of being able to anticipate something that comes by surprise. There's a whole range of soft skills that take you through life. There's a whole range of intellectual breadth as well. That's not just about knowing the classics, knowing the sciences, and feeling you're educated because you know both of them. There's a lot of breadth of mind that develops in the workplace and through technical education, where you're constantly having to toggle between different concepts, different technologies, and just keep pace with the changing nature of the workplace. So breadth and soft skills are not the sole province of the traditional academic education. We need both. I mean, I don't want to knock too hard the traditional model, but it shouldn't be defining the broad landscape of higher education. Then we come to what happens when people are in the workforce, because remember, invest in human potential through life. Start early, get public education right, get tertiary education right, so it's not slanted too much to the academic model. But then what happens when people are in the workforce, when they're mid-career, when they no longer feel they're that young? Churn is going to continue in the workforce. In fact, dislocation is going to continue apace, and AI is a much more powerful driver of disruption than previous technologies have been. We can't say for sure now whether the displacement of jobs that AI will bring will be larger than the way in which it complements jobs and helps augment human jobs. No one can say for now. In the short term, you'll probably get a lot of complementarity. In the long term, no one knows, because AI is becoming more and more powerful with regard to a much broader range of human tasks. But what we can do is to try to make sure that we develop skills continually now so as to reduce the prospect of AI being substitutive at some point in the future, and to increase the prospect of AI being complementary to human skills. In other words, don't wait to see what happens 15, 20 years from now. Start acting now in skills development, which means when people are still at work, when they're still in their prime, they haven't lost their job, they haven't been dislocated, invest now and invest continually. And that's what a few countries are now doing very seriously. I was at another session just now, we spoke about Singapore, we spoke about Denmark. They happen to be the smaller countries because I guess we have the advantage of feeling a little more vulnerable to the way technology and a changing world affects us. And so we prepare in advance. But everyone, including the largest countries or the largest states in countries, should have that same mindset. Invest in people continually, including when they're still at work. I was looking at the Edelman survey that just came out, many interesting dimensions of it. But one dimension that I think is now going to stick is that when you survey ordinary people and workers about what they want in employers, it used to be largely they want good pay. They want security and they want good pay. Now, equally important is they want training and retraining, just as important as good pay. And there's some wisdom in that. People have sussed out what's happening and what they need to have a secure job. Another dimension of what happens when you're midstream in life is we have to find ways in which those who are inevitably dislocated by trade or increasingly by automation and AI, find ways in which their skills and jobs can be regenerated. The market doesn't take care of this very well. It never has, particularly in large countries. So find ways in which communities of people, individuals and communities of people who've been displaced, can be retrained and re-geared to new employers and new areas of demand. It's been done quite well in a whole range of countries. For instance, if you look at coal workers, we have to phase out coal workers over time. In places like the state of Saarland in Germany, South Africa, the eastern province of Mpumalanga, in Korea, in each of those cases, they made deliberate effort to retrain coal workers for a range of other jobs. In Saarland, it was for the auto industry, which I know is going through some churn itself, but they got good jobs. In Korea, it was for giving them the skills to work on transmission lines and distribution for the power sector, including renewable power. And in South Africa, they received a whole range of other technical skills that gave them good jobs. Coal workers. So that has to be part and parcel, that has to be at the core of economic strategy and business strategy, and of governments working together with businesses. Creative destruction is part of the health of any economy, but the creation often happens in a different place from the dislocation, and we've got to take care of those whose jobs have been dislocated and help them to get back in. That is basic to what you might call industrial policy. That's basic. Final point I'd like to make has to do with informal workers. The reality is, the starting point is about 80%, 70 to 90% of workers in much of the developing world are in the informal sector. No security of employment, often no skills curve to move up, and typically underemployed as well, not really working full-time. It'll be unrealistic to think under any economic strategy that we're going to be able to convert all of them into formal employment soon. But we've got to reduce the gaps between what we think of as an informal sector and a formal sector. The formal sector with job security, social security, some obligations on the part of the employers to provide workplace injury compensation and the like. We've got to reduce that gap. And particularly, and we can start with platform workers, the so-called gig workers. It is entirely possible to give gig workers, as we've done in Singapore, in fact, workplace injury compensation, ensure mandatory social security contribution. We made it mandatory for the young workers, but for older workers, we let them opt in because it's good for them. and also ensure that employers feel that they have the responsibility to build up skills over time for that informal sector. Technology is going to be an enabler for the informal sector as well, from the street hawker to the taxi driver to the delivery worker to everyone else. We can improve productivity in the informal sector so as to improve incomes. So let's reduce that bifurcation between the informal and the formal sectors, because we're not realistically going to convert everyone into the formal sector, but we can reduce that bifurcation and enable more people to be on a curve through life where they gain skills, they gain incomes, and they feel they have some control over their lives. So let me stop there. I think the jobs challenge is a very serious one, but it's one of these things that's doable because we've seen how it's done well in some places, and we can apply those lessons or adapt those lessons elsewhere. It's also, unlike some other contentious issues in geopolitics and geoeconomics, very few countries can object to another country doing what it can to build up skills and capabilities and provide good jobs. That's actually the best form of industrial policy. Build up our own capabilities, keep building it up, even try to achieve superiority of capabilities rather than try to hold the other guy down. Thank you.
President Tharman, thank you so much. I think remarks like these are why we all come to Davos. So we really thank you so much for bringing all those thoughts together. Now we're going to invite our other panelists on stage. Please join us. Thank you. Let me please introduce our panelists. We have Denis Machuel, who is Chief Executive Officer of Adecco Group in Switzerland and the International Business Council. Veronica Nilsson, General Secretary of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD. We have Ryan Roslansky, who's the CEO of LinkedIn USA. And here, Gilbert Fossoun Houngbo, the Director General of the International Labor Organization. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to start with you, Veronica. The president talked about informal jobs versus formal jobs. And fascinating to hear him say, we don't have to force all jobs to be formal, but can we improve the informal jobs? Something you've given to which you've given a bunch of thought. How concerning is it that the 400 million jobs gap speaks to some people who are underemployed or just don't have stable employment in the world?
Thank you. Yeah, President, he made many important points about informality. 60% of workers work in the informal economy, so of course this is a huge challenge to trade unions and organized labor. There's one point which I would like to add to that, which is precariousness. There is an increase in precarious jobs, so our big challenge, our big concern is the rise of non-standard forms of employment. So for example, 0-hour contracts, platform work, and now even retail staff can actually be self-employed freelancers. And that means that it's very difficult for trade unions to organize them and to have collective bargaining if they are self-employed. And there's also this misclassification of people doing a job which are actually workers that don't have the independence to be classified as self-employed, yet they are considered as self-employed, so they don't get social protection, they don't get all the benefits and pension entitlements and so on. So this is a huge challenge for us. And that's also why we are calling on governments to support and facilitate collective bargaining, to strengthen collective bargaining. And of course, we are calling on companies as well to engage with us in collective bargaining. And we have, many trade unions have also been very inventive, trying to find ways of organizing these workers, even if they are so-called self-employed. But the challenge is huge. And another issue I would also like to raise is inequalities, because I think that is also linked to precariousness, that the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. And every year Oxfam issues the report on the number of billionaires, which keeps increasing. And is also something that the President mentioned at the beginning, that this is a societal issue. It affects the whole of society. And I think it's really a threat to democracy because the gap between those that have and those that have not is just too big. And that also explains why people vote for populist parties, for extremist parties, because they don't really see a future for themselves. So this is a huge issue which we're all confronted with, which I feel requires solutions between companies, trade unions, employers, and governments. It's not something that any one of us can just manage by themselves.
Let me turn to Gilbert. Can you speak to where countries, like where have you seen it actually work with countries playing an effective role working with companies to close the gaps?
I mean, of course, we do have a lot of experiences. The best thing is when countries trying to adapt the solution due to the national circumstances. One critical point to complement what you're saying in terms of the precarity and also what President Singapore was saying. Of course, the skill dimension is given. There's no debate on that. The education, the skill is given. But it's particularly for low and middle income countries, what we have noticed, if you don't, you have to be very careful about the mismatch, about what the skills you are developing and what the market is looking for, that at the national level, at the international level. Otherwise, you could have a very good education system, training people, that will end up in the informal sector because they don't find output on that. But the job gap is also what the 400 million, it's made up of more 187 million, which is really the classic unemployment that we know of.
That's the stricter definition of unemployment. Looking for a job, yeah. Don't have one, right?
Then we have those that are not looking for a job, but they will hope to have a job, but they are not looking for a job. We estimate that to be 137 million. And while we have also 83 million of workers that are totally discouraged. So one of the things that also we have noticed, after COVID, we know that the economic side quickly catch up. Up to a year and a half ago, we know that globally, North and South will catch up. However, the employment...
There was higher employment.
Yeah, higher unemployment. So by now, we are very pleased that the labor market also has catch up back to the pre-COVID era. So that's good news. However, what will happening if we look at the trends? That's why it's unavoidable that you have to look at it in terms of the transitions, starting with the digital and the greening of the economy, where we are much concerned that while a lot of jobs are also being created, if we don't adapt the skills to the needs in moving to the future, we may end up by contributing to the inequalities that my colleague was referring to. And talking about the inequalities, talking about the jobs in the AI environment, one thing that we tend to underestimate is the access, making the AI accessible, making the internet penetration still a challenge. And we take it for granted that, right. All of us, we want to go through AI, forgetting that if you cannot have access, and that, you talk about billions. And quickly, I don't want to monopolize the floor. The challenge from ILO perspective is the importance of making sure that the economic policies and the employment creation and job creation policies are dovetailed, which so far is not necessarily happening. And whether or not ILO, we talk about decent job, or the WEF, we talk about good job. at the end of the day, we really, really need to challenge ourselves. It's a matter of not the quantity of jobs being created, but the quality of the jobs. When we talk about, as we're speaking, we have 3.8 billion people that have zero protection, nothing protection. So we cannot just start saying that, okay, any job is better than no job at all. This is one of the cause of the increasing inequality that we are all talking about.
Denis, can you speak to that, just the nature of all the different forms of employment and along the spectrum of stability?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to understand that across the 9 largest countries, 40% of the jobs are either people that are self-employed or part-time, or temporary. And I think it requires us to think differently, to create a social frameworks that would encompass the traditional forms of work, and these new, in the days, of course, is the gig economy and the platform workers, but there's and these people are not accompanied properly. And when we talk about the skills gap and how people can, at the end of the day, the question is, how do we ensure that we create sustainable employment? And sustainable employment is not about jobs for life. It's about making sure that people do not become obsolete. And on this, what's absolutely critical is continuous, learning, upskilling and reskilling, together with, career guidance. And there are several roadblocks, we can talk about that, but this is core to how we ensure that the whole of the workforce is ready for the future.
But the technology is changing so fast, Ryan. And how, even if you say, I want to reskill, I want to stay relevant, I heard last night fear of becoming obsolete, FOBO. How, even if we all share that and individuals aspire to that, how do you keep up with this technology? Can you speak to what you're seeing from LinkedIn?
I mean, there's no doubt this is a fairly complex problem that requires an at-scale solution. And hopefully many of you know LinkedIn is that blue app on your phone. But underneath that, we aspire to build something remarkable to help solve these problems by building what we call the economic graph. It's a digital representation of every professional in the world. There's currently 1.1 billion of them. 8 people are joining LinkedIn every second. The 65 million companies on LinkedIn looking to employ those people. At any given time, those companies are posting 15 to 20 million jobs on the platform. We're able to deduce the skills that are in demand from those jobs, then able to produce the coursework to get those skills, to get those jobs, to work at those companies. This is an at-scale solution to the problem that we call the economic graph. It's extremely vibrant.
Raft, did you
graph,
say?
Yeah.
Graph.
A social graph, but an economic graph. And the value in this graph is that in the uncertainty of these problems, we can at least see some objective data of what's going on to help understand where skill gaps legitimately do exist. And how to help.
Where are they?
Well, they're everywhere, quite frankly. And I think one of the most important things that we see right now, which isn't new, is just the amount of change that's happening is truly unprecedented. If you were to take a look at the turn of the century, which is just 25 years ago, 20% of the jobs that are on LinkedIn didn't even exist 20 years ago. And even if you have a job that did exist 20 years ago, on average, 25% of the skills you need to do that job have already changed. So even if you're not changing your job is changing on you. And to your point, a lot of that is being fueled by AI. Even going back 8 years ago, the percentage of the LinkedIn member base that had at least one AI skill on their profile has increased by 20x, and 300% increase in hiring for people with AI skills. That's where the market is heading. But interestingly enough, it's not just about the technical AI skills. The most in-demand skill that people are looking for right now across this global economic graph are people skills, human skills, communication, collaboration, compassion, empathy. the things that you need that are truly human, that can't be automated out. So in this kind of sea of uncertainty and change, the path forward is one in which people are able to obviously understand the skills that they need for the employment that they want, but understanding that it's not just about these technical skills, that it's really a balance of both human and technical, which is where the market is heading.
I want to just do a quick pop quiz to the audience, and then we'll keep going. But when you think about the problems, the skills gap, the unemployment numbers around the world, do you think that AI will ultimately help or worsen the problem? Let's say hands for help.
It's an optimistic crowd.
Optimistic crowd. And hurt? If there's hesitancy, I would understand that, because as the president said, we really don't really know. And another conundrum that faces the whole job situation is we have these open jobs, job insecurity, and yet constantly we're reading about a population implosion. There's not enough people. We need robots. How do you reconcile that, Denis? It seems like these two phenomena at once. Or is that just tech companies' way of justifying robotics?
Well, actually, I think it's the challenge that we have is how do we make sure that this technology revolution doesn't create social unrest? And we've seen that the industrial revolution has created social unrest. So we have to make sure that, again, people are ready for that. People are, accustomed to what's going to happen. And it's also on the side of the companies, that they have to be more anticipative on their workforce. A lot of HR strategies are very reactive. Whatever happens to you, you adjust your workforce, right? I think it's time for the business to consider people as not as cost to the P&L, but as assets. One day, maybe these assets will be in balance sheet when maybe some new financial standards will come up. But for the moment, as much as you consider that you're going to, maintain your robots very seriously and invest in that, companies have to be more strategic and again, invest in the workforce. Upskill, reskill, make them ready to interact, just like what happened with digital. There was a lot when the digital revolution came, there was a lot of people who are not used to interacting with the systems. I think we've gone a long way, and people have progressed very much. One thing that I want to highlight on upskilling and reskilling is the gap that there is between the higher educated people and the other ones. We've done a study around 35,000 workers across 27 countries, and what they're telling us, 65% of high degree educated people are telling us that they have access to regular upskilling and reskilling. That number falls into the 40% for secondary educated people, secondary school. That's a problem, because this is going to create, again, inequalities.
It widens the gap.
Yeah, and given the magnitude of the number of people that we're talking about, this is something that we've got to take into account.
Have at it, Gilbert.
I just want to, not to challenge you, but to compliment or follow up on what you're saying, your question. For me, given the current geopolitics, etc., there are also contradictions that globally we are going through. On one hand, particularly, in global north, you could see that the communities are worried about migration. We have to recognize it and face it. On the flip side, we know the gap between where you have job shortages and available of skills. Mm-hmm. At one point, we will have to sit down to try to find at least a minimum way of moving forward where we can really have a win-win approach to what is acceptable and what could help fill in those gaps, including a combination of human being decent jobs together with robotics. I don't think that it will be either or.
It's just happening. It's coming
it's already
together.
happening. Even in the care economy, if you look at the care economy and the demographic that we all know about.
You say that's like
my point
church
is
teachers and nurses and
which is also
workers.
happening. On one hand, people telling that the robotics they're taking care of me and I don't need to deal with emotions. On the flip side, the robotic are not yet able to have a meaningful, compassionate dialogue that will, somebody that is maybe in a difficult situation in terms of life, But my point is that we should not shy away from those difficult situations we are facing globally. And it's not like one side is right, one side is wrong. We need each other. That's at the end of the day, we need each other. We got to see how do we deal with this labor migration in a way that will not cause fear on one side and that will also not cause brain drain on the other side, and that we can be some kind of a circular win-win situation.
Veronica, is technology the key issue here, or are there other factors that are getting underplayed with AI being the talk of the town?
I think there are just so many issues. I totally agree with what Gilbert just said and also what you said, because it's about the attractiveness of the profession. And if you cannot offer attractive working conditions, why would people move to that sector? It's also about social mobility. And again, it's very difficult to move where the jobs are. You might have gaps in some places, but that's not where the workers are. So this is a very difficult issue to tackle. And on AI, I think for us, the key point is really that this transition needs to be done in dialogue with workers. So when you introduce AI in the workplace, it has to be done in a dialogue with workers. And we also have very good examples showing that when you do this, you have better outcomes, because then the workers will not fear AI. It will be something that can complement them. So it will be positive. So it depends a lot on how you do it. But let's not forget that there are many risks. And I think here in Davos also, I saw it before, people want to focus on the positive things, which is very good. But if you're not prepared for the worst, I think that's not such a good idea. So I think we need to be prepared for the worst. And collective bargaining is key to how do you introduce AI, but we also need regulatory frameworks. Because collective bargaining cannot deal with all issues. And what I hear from all the discussions here in Davos is such a focus on deregulation, or call it better regulation or smart regulation. I'm not against cutting red tape for business or getting rid of obsolete legislation, but for me, this is a déjà vu, which I already experienced when it was introduced by the European Commission, by the previous president many years ago. And it was a very ideological agenda, and it was all about flexibilizing labor markets, making it more difficult for workers, and having quantitative targets so that one in, one out. So if you introduce a new piece of legislation, you have to remove another one, which is just a crazy zero-sum game. So that's some of my concerns. I think the focus is really on having the regulation we need, and AI needs to be regulated.
And one very quick example.
I just want to say to the audience, I'm going to come to you for questions next, but go ahead, Denis.
Just one quick example. To your point, we've included in our Responsible AI Committee our social partners. So employee representatives are part of, at the EDECO group, of the Responsible AI Committee that oversees everything that's happening. So it's a way to include, the workers into the discussions, right?
What I'm hearing a lot this week is AI is becoming the workers. The agents are the new workforce. Any questions in the audience? Please just state your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Frida. I'm from Global Shapers. Thank you so much. Well, I think we all agree about that we need reskilling, but my question is, who should be leading and also funding this effort to train workers on new skills, but mainly to ensure that augmentation is needed instead of replacement? So.
Who pays for it?
Yeah, that's the question.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that's a joint responsibility between governments and companies. What you said also before in the precedent about academic education, the problem is that governments are not investing enough in vocational training. There's just some interesting research published by the OECD which shows that it's even declining in a number of countries, vocational training. And this is the time when we need it more than ever. It's not the time to actually reduce vocational training. And it only makes up 0.01% of GDP. So I think it really shows that governments have a huge responsibility and they need to take that responsibility.
So you think
and
the
companies are
taxpayer,
responsible too.
Right.
taxpayer, but go ahead.
I think it's a collaboration between the private sector, of course, the governments, the social partners, the educational system. I mean, I think it's everyone that has to contribute and not work in silos. We have a very good example that we've in Europe where we worked with a car maker that had to do this big transition towards electric vehicle, and so we worked together. We decided to invest together into the upskilling, reskilling of the workers. And when the government of that country saw that, they say, well, this is a great idea because you've decided to put money. We will double down to scale that faster. So that I think is a good example of a collaboration. And between typically the private employment services and public employment services, and because that's how it works. We cannot succeed alone in silos.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Veronica. I'm part of the Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum and also a CEO and founder of a communication holding company. One of the companies is about personal brands. So now works. In platform like LinkedIn, people need to show more their skills, telling the world what they are doing in order to be more employable. And I want to know, what do you think about the capacity of people to be online and talk about their professional life? It's a struggle for many people. That's why we have a company just for that. The name is So Personal AI. And my question will be, now with the remote work and platforms like LinkedIn, also the possibilities of showing my work and showing what I'm doing makes me not only an employee possible and finding work in my own country, also in other parts of the world. So it's also a new type of defined high employability.
Not just have the skills, but how do you show the world you have the skills? You want to speak to that, Ryan?
I think that's really what we aspire to create at massive scale, because in order to solve a lot of the problems we're talking about right now, if you take a step way back, it's just a massive matching game. How do you understand what someone is able to do? How do you understand what someone is looking for and be able to match these things at massive scale? Historically, you go back even 20 years ago, it was all done, kind of hidden with, paper resumes. You weren't sure which companies had which jobs. We try and bring that transparency to the marketplace through our platform. I think it started slow, but now, we have 1 billion people, 8 people join per second. But what's fascinating is what you just said, is people are often not sure what they should be saying about themselves. How do I show what skills that I have? A lot of times the soft skills, you can't just say, I know communication. How do you show you know communication? So we're continuously trying to evolve our tools using more video, things like that, to allow people to showcase who they are and what they are. Because ultimately when they can do that, we can help them find opportunity either locally where they are, or to your point now, somewhere else across the world, because it's not just about local markets now. It's a global labor market that needs to connect at massive scale. So I think it's spot on. Thank you.
Seeing a lot of hands. How about this one in the back with,
Talafalava, thank you very much. Luna Rosa, Global Shapers from Samoa. I'd like to ask, with the workforce facing an ever-growing skill gap in markets, with oversaturated and multiple forms of qualifications, example, one person with a bachelor degree of 20 years of experience, and then we have another person with 3 years of working experience and 3 master's degrees. How can people from developing countries hope to compete or remain relevant with their skills in an ever-growing industry in the global economy? Sorry. Especially when these days, AI is now filtering job applications. So if you don't have a master's degree, but you have 20, 25 years of work experience,
how do
kind
you
of
how do you
immediately rejected.
convince people that what you've got is good enough? Do you want to take that, Denis?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, actually, I believe that the era that we are entering into with this generative AI revolution is probably an opportunity, because we are rebasing competencies and skills, etc. And AI is fragmenting jobs, and we're moving from a job-based economy to a skills-based economy. And so the more, and I think we're going to be more and more good at identifying the intrinsic skills of people. I think AI can help us remove the bias, what you were mentioning, if done properly, and that's what we strive for. That's what we need to achieve. But when we do that, I think I'm convinced this can be, if we do it well, an era of more equal opportunities.
A hopeful note for the equalization of the workforce through technology. I think we're going to end on that, but maybe you can stay after. People have some thoughts or wherever it was. Thank you so much. It was an excellent panel. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.